The scream tore through the dusty evening air of Tombstone, Arizona, sharp enough to cut through the raucous laughter spilling from the Crystal Palace saloon, and Clayton Hayes felt his hand freeze halfway to his whiskey glass. It was June of 1882. The sun bleeding red across the horizon like a wound in the sky, and the sound of a woman in distress was not something any decent man could ignore, even in a town that had seen more than its share of violence in recent months. He pushed back from the bar, his boots hitting the wooden floor with purpose, and was through the swinging doors before the bartender could call after him about his unpaid tab. What he saw made his blood run cold despite the lingering desert heat. A heavy-set man in a torn vest had a woman by the arm, dragging her toward the alley between the general store and the assayer's office, her feet scrambling for purchase in the dirt as she fought against his grip. Her dark hair had come loose from its pins, streaming behind her like a banner of resistance, and even from 20 feet away, Clayton could see the white-knuckled terror in how she clawed at the man's thick fingers. "Let her go." Clayton's voice cut across the space between them, low and steady, the kind of voice that suggested compliance was not optional. The man turned, his florid face twisted with anger and what looked like 3 sheets to the wind worth of whiskey courage. "Mind your own business, cowboy. This here is between me and my property." "Your property?" The woman's voice cracked with fury and fear combined. "I am nobody's property, Frank Delaney, and I told you I would never marry you, not if you were the last man in the Arizona Territory." Clayton moved closer, his hand resting easy near his hip where his Colt Peacemaker sat in its holster. He was not looking for a fight, had spent the last 3 months trying to avoid exactly that after leaving his family's ranch in Texas under circumstances he preferred not to dwell on. But he was not about to watch a woman get hurt either. "The lady seems pretty clear about her feelings. I suggest you respect them." Frank Delaney's face went from red to purple. "She does not know what she wants. Her father owes me money and we had an arrangement. She's going to honor it whether she likes it or not." "I am not going to honor anything," the woman spat, renewing her struggles. "My father's debts died with him 2 weeks ago and you know it. You are trying to collect something that was never promised in the first place." Clayton took another step forward, his tall frame casting a long shadow in the dying light. "Seems to me the lady has made her position abundantly clear. Now, I am going to ask you one more time politely to let go of her arm." For a moment, the tableau held, 3 people frozen in the amber light of the desert evening while the sounds of Tombstone continued around them, oblivious to the small drama playing out. Then, Frank Delaney made his mistake. He released the woman's arm only to reach for the gun at his own hip, his movements clumsy with drink. Clayton's draw was faster, clean and practiced, the Colt appearing in his hand as though it had materialized there by magic. "I would not do that if I were you." Delaney froze, his gun half cleared from its holster, his eyes suddenly focusing enough to realize he was looking down the barrel of a steady aim from a man who clearly knew what he was doing. "You are making a mistake, stranger. The only mistake I see is you not walking away right now while you still can." Clayton's voice remained level, but there was steel underneath it. "The lady does not want your company. That should be the end of this discussion." For a long moment, Delaney's alcohol-fogged brain worked through the mathematics of his situation. Finally, self-preservation won out over drunken bravado. He let his gun drop back into its holster and raised his hands. "This is not over. Her father owed me $300, and I will collect one way or another. Take it up with a lawyer, not by accosting women in the street." Clayton kept his gun trained on the man until Delaney backed away, stumbling slightly, before turning and lurching off toward the seedier end of Allen Street. Only when the man had disappeared around a corner did Clayton lower his weapon and turn his attention to the woman. She had pressed herself against the wall of the general store, her chest heaving with ragged breaths, her gray-green eyes wide in her pale face. She was younger than he had first thought, probably no more than 22 or 23, with delicate features that spoke of Eastern refinement rather than frontier hardiness. Her dress was simple but well-made, dark blue calico with tiny white flowers, now dusty and torn at the hem from her struggle. "Are you all right, miss?" Clayton holstered his gun and took a careful step toward her, keeping his movements slow and non-threatening. She nodded, then shook her head, then seemed unable to decide and simply pressed her hand to her mouth as though holding back either a sob or a scream. Clayton noticed her hand was trembling. He looked around, suddenly aware that their confrontation had drawn a small crowd of onlookers, most of whom were now drifting back to their own business with the peculiar indifference of people who had seen too much excitement to be easily impressed. "Is there somewhere I can escort you?" "Someone who should be told about this." The woman lowered her hand, straightening her spine with visible effort. Yes, no, I mean." She took a shaky breath and tried again. "Thank you. You probably saved me from. I do not want to think about what might have happened." "Then let's not think about it," Clayton said gently. "Let's think about getting you somewhere safe instead. Do you live nearby?" "I have a room at the boarding house. Mrs. Murphy's place on 5th Street. Her voice was steadier now, though he could still see the shock in her eyes. "But I cannot go back there yet. Frank knows where I live. He has been following me for days, making threats, saying terrible things about what he would do if I did not agree to his demands." Clayton frowned. "Has the marshal been told about this?" A bitter laugh escaped her. "The marshal has made it clear that private debts are private business, and unless Frank actually commits a crime, there is nothing to be done. Apparently, harassment and intimidation do not count." That tracked with what Clayton had heard about law enforcement in Tombstone. The town was still recovering from the aftermath of the Earp brothers and their conflicts with the Cowboys faction, and the current authorities seemed more interested in keeping their heads down than in maintaining any real order. "What about friends? Family?" "My father was all I had. He brought me out here 6 months ago, certain he could make his fortune in silver. Instead, She stopped, swallowing hard. "He got sick. Fever took him quick. And when I went through his papers after he passed, I found he had borrowed money from Frank Delaney and others. More money than I can ever repay on a seamstress's wages." Clayton studied her face, seeing not just the fear but the exhaustion there, the bone-deep weariness of someone who had been holding herself together through sheer force of will. "A seamstress," she had said. That explained the calluses he could see on her fingers, the practical way she wore her hair. "What is your name?" he asked. She hesitated, as though even that small piece of information was dangerous to give, then seemed to decide he had earned at least that much. Grace Patterson." "Clayton Hayes." He touched the brim of his hat. "Miss Patterson, I know we are strangers, but I would like to help if you will allow it. At the very least, let me walk you somewhere safe while we figure out what to do about Frank Delaney and his threats." Grace's eyes searched his face, looking for something he hoped she would find there. Whatever she saw must have reassured her because some of the tension went out of her shoulders. "I appreciate that, Mr. Hayes, truly. But I do not want to impose on your kindness any more than I already have." "You have done more than enough." "I have not done anything yet except point a gun at a drunk bully. That is not kindness, that is just common decency." Clayton glanced up at the darkening sky. "It will be full dark soon, and you should not be alone on the streets if Delaney is still angry and still drinking. There is a restaurant, the Mason Dory, couple blocks from here. It is public enough to be safe but quiet enough to talk. Let me buy you supper while we discuss your options." She looked like she wanted to refuse, pride warring with pragmatism across her expressive features. Finally, pragmatism won. "All right, but I insist on paying for my own meal. I am not a charity case." "Never thought you were." Clayton offered his arm, and after a moment's hesitation, she took it. They walked through the dusty streets of Tombstone as evening settled over the town like a blanket. The air was finally starting to cool after the brutal heat of the day, though the buildings still radiated warmth like stones around a fire. Lamps were being lit in windows, casting pools of yellow light onto the boardwalks, and somewhere a piano was playing, slightly out of tune but enthusiastic. Clayton found himself acutely aware of the woman on his arm, the way she held herself with careful dignity despite everything that had just happened. She was brave, he decided. Scared but brave, and there was something admirable in that combination. The Mason dory was relatively quiet when they entered, just a few early diners scattered among the tables. The proprietor, a dapper Frenchman named Pierre who everyone knew was actually named Pete from Illinois, showed them to a corner table and presented menus with a flourish that seemed only slightly mocking. Grace ordered soup and bread, Clayton asked for steak and potatoes, and then they were alone with a flickering candle between them and the weight of unspoken questions hanging in the air. "So," Clayton said, leaning back in his chair, "tell me about this debt of your father's." Grace sighed, her fingers playing with the edge of the tablecloth. "He borrowed $300 from Frank Delaney about 4 months ago, said he needed it to invest in a mining claim that was sure to pay off. The claim turned out to be worthless, of course. My father was a dreamer, Mr. Hayes. A kind man, a good man, but not practical, never practical. And Delaney wants his money back, with interest. He is demanding $500 now, claiming that was the agreed-upon amount." Her voice was tight with frustration. "I have been through every paper my father left. There is no contract, no written agreement, just Delaney's word that my father promised to pay him back double. Even if that is true, that does not give him the right to force you into marriage." "No, but apparently my father mentioned something to him about it when he was drinking one night. Delaney has convinced himself that there was some kind of understanding, some arrangement that I would marry him if the debt could not be repaid." She looked up, her eyes flashing with anger. "I would rather die than marry that man. He is cruel and crude in the way he looks at me." She shuddered. Clayton felt his jaw tighten. "Has he hurt you? Before tonight, I mean. Grabbed me a few times, cornered me once in the alley behind the boarding house and tried to kiss me. I kicked him hard enough that he stayed away for a few days, but he has been getting bolder." She paused as the waiter brought their food, waiting until he had left before continuing. "I have been trying to save money to leave Tombstone, but it is slow going. Everything I earn goes to rent and food, and I have been trying to pay down some of my father's other debts so I can leave with a clear conscience." "How much do you owe in total?" "Besides Delaney's claim, another $100, scattered among various merchants and the boarding house itself." "My father was generous with money he did not have." There was love in her voice despite the exasperation. Clayton cut into his steak, thinking. $300 was a substantial sum, more than most cowboys made in half a year. 500 was nearly impossible for someone in Grace's position. "Where would you go if you could leave?" "I have an aunt in San Francisco, my mother's sister. She has written several times asking me to come live with her, but Grace stirred her soup without eating it. "I suppose I was hoping I could make something of myself here first. Prove I could stand on my own feet before running to family for help. Foolish pride, I know. Not foolish, human." Clayton took a bite of his steak, which was tougher than boot leather but edible. What if Delaney's claim could be disputed? You said there is no written contract. I spoke to a lawyer. He said without my father here to contest it, and with Delaney's reputation as a businessman in town, it would be hard to prove. The lawyer wanted $100 retainer just to take the case, which I do not have. They ate in silence for a few minutes, Clayton's mind working through possibilities. He had money, some of it at least. The sale of his portion of the family ranch had netted him nearly $800, money he had been planning to use to start fresh somewhere new, somewhere no one knew about the scandal that had driven him from Texas. But looking at Grace Patterson's tired, frightened face, at the pride she was struggling to maintain despite her circumstances, he found himself wanting to help in a way that surprised him. "What do you want, Miss Patterson?" She looked up at him, startled. "What do I want?" "Yes. If you could have anything, do anything, what would it be? Forget about the debts and Frank Delaney for a moment. What would make you happy?" The question seemed to catch her off guard. She set down her spoon, her expression softening into something almost wistful. "I want to feel safe again. I want to wake up in the morning without wondering if today is the day Frank forces his way into my room or corners me in a place where no one can help. I want—" She paused, as though afraid to voice the deeper dream. "I want a life that is mine, a home. Maybe a little dress shop of my own someday, where I could make beautiful things and not have to work for pennies from women who look down on me because I am poor. I want stability and peace and the freedom to choose my own path." Clayton nodded slowly. "Those seem like reasonable wants." "Reasonable but impossible." Grace picked up her spoon again. "I am sorry, Mr. Hayes. You have been very kind, but I should not be burdening you with my troubles. You are a stranger who happened to be in the right place at the right time, and I am grateful for your help tonight, but this is my problem to solve. What if it did not have to be?" The words were out before Clayton had fully thought them through, but once spoken, he found he did not want to take them back. "What if there was a way to solve this that gave you what you want?" Grace frowned. "I do not understand." Clayton leaned forward, keeping his voice low. "I could pay off your father's debts, all of them. Give you enough to start fresh somewhere new, somewhere Frank Delaney cannot bother you." Her eyes went wide. "Mr. Hayes, I could not possibly accept such generosity. That would be—" "No, absolutely not. I barely know you." "I know. Which is why I would not offer it as charity." Clayton chose his next words carefully. "What if we made an arrangement, a business arrangement of sorts?" "What kind of arrangement?" Her voice was cautious now, wary. "Marriage." The word dropped between them like a stone into still water. Grace stared at him as though he had started speaking Chinese. "Not a real marriage," Clayton clarified quickly. "At least, not in the way you are thinking. A marriage of convenience. We could go to the courthouse tomorrow, make it legal, and that would solve both our problems." "Both our problems." Grace's voice had gone faint. "Mr. Hayes, you have not mentioned having any problems. I need a wife." The admission felt strange in his mouth. "Or rather, I need to appear to have a wife. My family back in Texas thinks I am out here making my fortune and settling down. If I return there without evidence of having done so, I will be expected to come back and take my place in the family business, which is something I cannot do." "Why not?" Clayton hesitated. "That is a long story and not one I am proud of. The short version is that I had a disagreement with my brother that ended badly, and returning home would reopen wounds that need to stay closed. But my mother is elderly and worries. If I could write and tell her I am married, settled, and building a life here, it would ease her mind and keep my family from sending anyone to drag me back." Grace was shaking her head slowly. "This is insane. People do not just marry strangers for convenience. They do it all the time out here." Mail-order brides, arranged marriages for land and property. This would not be so different, except we would both know what we are agreeing to up front. Clayton kept his voice reasonable, logical. Think about it, Miss Patterson. As my wife, you would be under my protection. Frank Delaney would have no claim on you whatsoever. I would pay off your debts and give you enough money to travel to San Francisco or anywhere else you wanted to go. After a suitable time, 6 months or a year, we could quietly divorce or simply go our separate ways. No one in Tombstone would care enough to track it down. And what would you get out of this besides the fiction of being married? Peace of mind knowing my family is not going to show up here, and the satisfaction of helping someone who needs it. He met her eyes. I am not a perfect man, Miss Patterson, but I am a decent one. I would not take advantage of this arrangement in any way. You would have your own room, your own space, your own life. The marriage would be on paper only, unless and until you decided otherwise. Grace's face had gone through several shades of emotion during this speech, settling finally on something between disbelief and desperate hope. This is the most absurd thing I have ever heard, probably. But is it more absurd than being forced to marry Frank Delaney, or spending the next 5 years of your life scraping together pennies while looking over your shoulder? She was silent for a long moment, her soup forgotten. Clayton could see her thinking, weighing options, calculating risks. Finally, she spoke. If I agreed to this madness, how would it work? Where would we live? I have been staying at the Grand Hotel, but that would not be suitable for a married couple. We could rent a house, something small and respectable. I could find work, ranching or something similar. You could continue your seamstress work or not, as you pleased. We would live as roommates essentially, maintaining the appearance of marriage for the outside world but keeping our actual relationship platonic and businesslike. And after 6 months or a year, you would be free to go wherever you wanted, with enough money to start fresh and no one to stop you. I would stay here or move on myself, having satisfied my family's expectations. Clayton spread his hands. I am not offering you a fairy tale, Miss Patterson. I am offering you a way out of an impossible situation. What you make of that way out would be entirely up to you. Grace picked up her water glass and took a long drink, clearly buying time to think. When she set it down, her hand was steadier than it had been earlier. You are asking me to trust you with my entire future based on one act of kindness in the street. I am asking you to make a calculated decision based on your current circumstances versus your other options, which, as far as I can see, are limited to running away in the night with nothing or eventually being worn down by Frank Delaney's harassment. You paint a grim picture. I paint an honest one. Clayton pushed his plate away, the meal sitting heavy in his stomach. Look, I know this is sudden. I know I am essentially a stranger. But sometimes in life, we have to make hard choices with imperfect information. All I can tell you is that I give you my word as a man that I would treat you with respect and honor the terms of any agreement we made. The rest you would have to decide for yourself. Grace was quiet for so long that Clayton thought she might simply get up and walk away, and he would not have blamed her. The whole idea was insane, the kind of impulsive notion he usually avoided. But there was something about her fierce determination to maintain her dignity in the face of circumstances that would have broken many people, that made him want to help. I need time to think, she finally said. This is not a decision I can make over soup in a restaurant. Of course. Take the night. I am staying in room 12 at the Grand Hotel. You can send word tomorrow with your answer or come speak to me directly if you prefer. Clayton pulled out his pocket watch, noting it was nearly 8 o'clock. For tonight, let me walk you back to your boarding house and make sure you get there safely. That much, at least, requires no decision beyond letting me play the gentleman. A small smile tugged at the corner of Grace's mouth, the first real smile he had seen from her. "You have been very kind, Mr. Hayes. Whatever I decide about your proposition, I want you to know I appreciate your help tonight. Just doing what anyone should do, madam." They settled the bill, with Grace insisting on paying for her soup despite Clayton's protests, and stepped back out into the night. Tombstone after dark was a different creature than during the day, all shadow and lamplight and the sounds of entertainment from the saloons and gambling halls. Clayton kept Grace on the inside of the boardwalk, away from the street, and his hand stayed near his gun out of habit. Mrs. Murphy's boarding house was a respectable two-story structure painted white, with a neat garden in front that someone clearly tended with care. A lamp burned in the front window, and Clayton could see the silhouette of presumably Mrs. Murphy herself moving around inside. At the door, Grace turned to face him. "Thank you for supper, Mr. Hayes, and for everything else." "My pleasure, Miss Patterson." He tipped his hat. "I hope you will think seriously about my offer. I believe it could benefit us both." "I will think about it. That is all I can promise right now." She hesitated, then added, "If I were to consider this, I would need certain assurances. Written agreements about the financial arrangements and the terms of separation when the time comes. Of course, anything you need to feel secure in the arrangement." Clayton felt a flicker of hope. If she was thinking about logistics, she was at least considering it seriously. "Good night, Mr. Hayes." "Good night, Miss Patterson." He waited until she had gone inside, and he saw a lamp light up in a second-floor window before he turned and walked back toward his hotel. The night air was cool now, almost cold, the desert giving up its heat as quickly as it absorbed it. Above, the stars were brilliant in the clear sky, uncountable and indifferent to the small dramas of humans below. Clayton found himself hoping that Grace Patterson would say yes, and the intensity of that hope surprised him. He barely knew the woman, had spoken to her for perhaps 2 hours total, yet something about her had gotten under his skin. Her courage, maybe, or her stubborn pride, or the way she had held herself together, even while being terrorized by Frank Delaney. Or maybe it was simpler than that. Maybe he was just tired of being alone, tired of running from his past, and saw in this strange arrangement a chance to build something approximating a normal life, even if it was based on a mutually agreed-upon fiction. Back in his hotel room, Clayton lay on top of the covers fully clothed, staring at the ceiling and wondering what the next day would bring. He thought about writing a letter to his mother, but decided to wait until he knew whether Grace would accept his offer. No point in mentioning a wife who might not materialize. Sleep came eventually, restless and full of half-remembered dreams. He woke to bright sunlight streaming through the window and the sounds of Tombstone coming to life below. After washing up and shaving, Clayton went downstairs to the hotel restaurant for breakfast, his nerves surprisingly on edge. Would Grace come? Would she send word? Or would she simply disappear, deciding that his offer was too strange to accept? He was halfway through his eggs when a boy of perhaps 10 appeared at his table, holding a folded piece of paper. "You Mr. Hayes?" "I am. Lady at the boarding house gave me 2 bits to bring you this." The boy handed over the note and darted away before Clayton could tip him. Clayton unfolded the paper, recognizing neat, careful handwriting. "Mr. Hayes, I have considered your proposal, and while I still think it is madness, I find myself without better alternatives. If your offer is genuine, I am willing to discuss terms. I will be at the Nellie Cashman restaurant at 10 o'clock this morning. If you are there, we can talk further. If not, I will understand that you have reconsidered in the sober light of day. Grace Patterson." Clayton checked his watch. 9:15. He had 45 minutes. He finished his breakfast quickly, paid his bill, and went back to his room to make himself presentable. He put on his best shirt, the dark blue one without any stains or repairs, and made sure his boots were clean. If they were going to discuss terms for a marriage, even a fake one, he should at least look respectable. The Nellie Cashman restaurant was a well-regarded establishment run by a formidable Irish woman who was known throughout Tombstone for her charitable works and no-nonsense attitude. Clayton had eaten there once before and found both the food and the atmosphere superior to most of what the town had to offer. He arrived at 5 minutes to 10 and found Grace already there, seated at a corner table with a cup of tea in front of her. She wore a different dress today, gray with black trim, and her hair was pulled back in a severe bun that made her look older and more stern than she had the night before. But her eyes held the same wary intelligence, and he could see the tension in her shoulders. "Miss Patterson." He took the seat across from her. "Thank you for agreeing to meet, Mr. Hayes." She folded her hands on the table. "I did not sleep much last night thinking about your offer. Neither did I. I have questions." "I expected you would. Ask away." Grace glanced around to make sure no one was within earshot, then leaned forward slightly. "If we do this, I need to understand exactly what you expect from me. You said the marriage would be on paper only. I need you to clarify what that means." Clayton kept his voice low. "It means you would have your own bedroom with a lock on the door if you wanted it. I would make no demands on you of any intimate nature. We would present as a married couple to the outside world, but in private, we would live as two people sharing a house for convenience. And if you changed your mind about those terms, I would not. But if it would make you feel better, we can put it in writing. Any attempt on my part to violate that agreement would void the entire arrangement, and you would still receive the full financial settlement we agreed upon." Grace nodded slowly. "What about the debts? You said you would pay them off, all of them. Every penny your father owed, including Frank Delaney's claim, even though I think it is probably fraudulent." Clayton had thought this through during his own sleepless night. "I would also set aside a sum for you, held in an account in your name alone. When we part ways, that money would be yours to do with as you please." "How much?" $500. It was more than he had originally considered, nearly 2/3 of his total savings, but Clayton found he did not care. Money could be earned again. Setting right an injustice felt more important. Grace's eyes widened. "That is too much, far too much." "That is my offer. You would be doing me a service by making this arrangement, and you deserve to be compensated fairly for it." He paused. "There is one thing I would ask in return, beyond maintaining the appearance of marriage." Her jaw tightened. "What?" "Letters. I would need you to write to my mother occasionally, maybe once a month, telling her how we are doing. Nothing elaborate, just enough to maintain the fiction that we are happily married and settling into our life here." The tension went out of Grace's shoulders. "That is all. Letters. That is all." She picked up her teacup, took a sip, set it down again. Her hands were steadier than they had been yesterday, but Clayton could see the magnitude of the decision weighing on her. "If I agree, how quickly would this happen?" "We could go to the courthouse this afternoon if you wanted. Get the marriage license, find someone to perform the ceremony. It does not have to be elaborate. And where would we live?" "I saw a house for rent on Safford Street yesterday, small but respectable. 2 bedrooms, a sitting room, and a kitchen. The landlord is asking $30 a month, which is steep but manageable. We could look at it together if you like, see if it meets your needs." Grace was quiet for a long moment, her fingers tracing the rim of her teacup. When she spoke, her voice was soft but steady. "Last night, after I got back to my room, Frank Delaney came to the boarding house. Mrs. Murphy turned him away, but I could hear him shouting in the street. He said he knew I was alone, that eventually he would catch me without protection, and when he did, I would learn what it meant to defy him. Clayton felt anger kindle in his chest. Did anyone call the marshal? Mrs. Murphy threatened to, and that is what finally made him leave. But it will happen again. He is not going to give up. She looked up, meeting Clayton's eyes. I do not love you, Mr. Hayes. I do not even know you, but you have shown me more respect and kindness in 12 hours than Frank Delaney has in 3 months of acquaintance. So if your offer is genuine, if you truly mean what you say about the terms and the money and the separation, then yes, I accept. Clayton let out a breath he had not realized he was holding. You are sure? I am sure that staying as I am will lead to nothing good. I am sure that I trust you more than I trust my other options. Beyond that, she shrugged, a gesture of acceptance more than resignation. Sometimes we make decisions without perfect certainty and hope they turn out right. Then let's make this official. Clayton extended his hand across the table. Partners? Grace looked at his hand for a moment, then reached out and shook it. Her grip was firm, her palms slightly rough with calluses from sewing. Partners. They spent the next hour hashing out the details, keeping their voices low and their conversation looking like nothing more than two people having a serious discussion over tea. Grace wanted assurance that she could continue working if she chose to, which Clayton readily agreed to. Clayton wanted confirmation that Grace would help maintain the household in terms of cooking and such, which Grace found reasonable. They discussed how long the arrangement should last before they separated, settling on 1 year as a good balance between plausibility and commitment. After a year, we can reassess, Clayton suggested. If the arrangement is working for both of us, we can continue. If not, we part ways amicably with the financial terms honored. And if one of us wants to end it before the year is up, then we discuss it like adults and figure out a fair solution. Clayton signaled the waiter for more coffee. Grace, I want to be clear about something. I am not trying to trap you or trick you. This is meant to benefit us both, and if at any point it stops doing that, we should be able to acknowledge it and make changes. The use of her first name seemed to catch her attention. She studied his face as though trying to read something written there. You are a strange man, Clayton Hayes. I have been told that before. He smiled slightly. Is strange bad in this context? I have not decided yet. But there was the hint of a smile playing around her lips too. They left the restaurant together and made their way to the courthouse, a squat adobe building that served as the administrative center for Cochise County. The clerk who processed their marriage license looked bored, asked the required questions without real interest, and collected the fee without comment. Getting married in Tombstone was apparently common enough to be routine. Finding someone to perform the ceremony took longer. The local minister was conducting a funeral, and the justice of the peace had left town for the week. They finally tracked down Judge Hiram Brooks, a retired jurist who supplemented his pension by performing weddings and resolving minor disputes. He agreed to marry them in his office for $5, which seemed to Clayton like rank profiteering, but was easier than continuing to search. The ceremony, if it could be called that, took less than 5 minutes. Judge Brooks read through the required words in a monotone, pausing only to ask if they had rings. When they said no, he shrugged and continued. Clayton said, I do, when prompted, and Grace did the same, her voice quiet but clear. The judge pronounced them man and wife, suggested they might want a kiss, and seemed unsurprised when they did not. They walked out of the judge's office married, holding a certificate that declared them legally husband and wife in the territory of Arizona. The whole thing felt surreal to Clayton, like he was watching someone else's life unfold rather than his own. Well, Grace said, standing on the courthouse steps and staring at the marriage certificate as though it might disappear if she blinked. That was not how I imagined my wedding day when I was a little girl. I hope it was not too disappointing. It was practical. Given the circumstances, practical is probably the best we could hope for. She folded the certificate carefully. What now? Now we become Frank Delaney's worst nightmare. Clayton felt a grim satisfaction at the thought. Let's pay a visit to his office and settle this debt business once and for all. Frank Delaney operated out of a shabby office above a dry goods store, calling himself a banker, though he was really just a loan shark with pretensions. Clayton and Grace climbed the narrow stairs and found him at his desk, looking even worse than he had the previous evening. His eyes were bloodshot and he needed a shave. When Delaney looked up and saw Grace, his face twisted into an ugly smile. Well, come to apologize for last night's dramatics, and brought your cowboy protector with you, I see. Actually, she brought her husband, Clayton said, stepping forward. Mr. Delaney, I am Clayton Hayes, and as of 1 hour ago, Grace Patterson became Grace Hayes, which means any business you had with her is now my business. The smile slid off Delaney's face. Husband, you got married. That is impossible. Grace held up the marriage certificate. As you can see, it is entirely possible. We have the legal paperwork and everything. Delaney's face went through several shades of red and purple. This is a trick, some kind of scheme to avoid paying what is owed. On the contrary, I am here to settle the debt. Clayton pulled a leather wallet from his jacket pocket. You claim my wife's father owed you $300. I think you are lying, but in the interest of closing this matter permanently, I am willing to pay you $200 right now. You take it, we get a signed receipt saying the debt is paid in full and you never approach my wife again. Ever. 200. I am owed 500. You are owed nothing except what you can prove, and you cannot prove anything. $200 is generous, more generous than you deserve. Take it or leave it, but understand that if I ever see you near my wife again, we are going to have a much less pleasant conversation. Delaney looked between them, his expression calculating. Finally, greed won out. 300. I will take 300 and not a penny less. Clayton considered. He had expected to negotiate. 250, and that is my final offer. You can take it or explain to a judge why you are harassing a married woman over a debt you have no written proof of. Fine. 250. Delaney spat the words. But this does not change what her father owed other people. She is still in debt up to her eyeballs. That is our business, not yours. Clayton counted out the money, then waited while Delaney wrote out a receipt in his cramped handwriting. Once it was signed and witnessed by Grace, Clayton took the paper and tucked it safely away. Pleasure doing business with you, Mr. Delaney. Do not let us cross paths again. They left Delaney fuming in his office and made their way back down to the street. Grace was trembling, though whether from relief or residual fear, Clayton could not tell. Are you all right? He asked. I think so. It is just... She took a shaky breath. That is over. He cannot claim I owe him anything now. One nightmare ended. How many others are there? 3. The boarding house is owed $45. Mr. Chen at the laundry is owed 30. And the general store is owed 25. She recited the numbers as though she had them memorized, which she probably did. Let's take care of them now while we are at it. They spent the next 2 hours visiting each creditor, with Clayton paying off the debts and collecting receipts. Mr. Chen at the laundry bowed repeatedly and wished them a long and happy marriage. The man at the general store grumbled that he had expected to never see that money, but accepted it readily enough. Mrs. Murphy at the boarding house looked between them with shrewd eyes and declared she had known something was brewing when she saw the way Clayton had looked at Grace the night before. I did not look at her any particular way, Clayton protested. "You looked at her like she mattered. That is particular enough." Mrs. Murphy patted Grace's hand. "You have found yourself a good man, dear. Do not let him go." Grace smiled, a real smile this time. "I will do my best, Mrs. Murphy." By early afternoon, Grace Patterson's debts were entirely settled. Clayton had spent nearly $400 in total, more than he had originally planned, but the look of relief on Grace's face made it worthwhile. "I do not know how to thank you," she said as they walked toward Safford Street to look at the house he had mentioned. "You have given me my life back. You do not need to thank me. This is what we agreed to." But her words warmed something in him nonetheless. The house on Safford Street was small but charming, with whitewashed walls and a tin roof that had been painted red. The landlord, a laconic man named Mr. Carson, showed them through the rooms. There was a sitting room with a fireplace, a kitchen with a wood stove, and 2 bedrooms of roughly equal size. The furniture was simple but serviceable, and the place was clean. "I can have it ready for occupancy tomorrow," Mr. Carson said. "First and last month's rent up front, that is $60. Clayton paid him, and they shook hands on it. Mr. Carson handed over 2 keys and left them to explore their new home. Grace walked through the room slowly, touching walls, looking out windows. In the kitchen, she ran her hand over the stove. "This is nicer than anywhere I have lived since coming to Tombstone." "Which bedroom do you want?" Clayton asked. She looked at him, then at the 2 doors. "The one on the right, if that is acceptable. It has a window that faces east, and I like morning light." "Then it is yours." Clayton walked over and handed her one of the keys. "The lock on the door works, I checked. You can have privacy whenever you want it." Grace took the key, her fingers closing around it. "You are being very decent about all of this." "I told you I would be." "Yes, but men say many things. Following through is rarer." She met his eyes. "I want you to know that I will hold up my end of this arrangement too. I will cook and keep house and write letters to your mother. I will be a good wife, even if it is only pretend." "I do not think it will feel like pretend," Clayton said quietly. "We are living together, building something together, even if it is temporary. That seems real enough to me." They stood in the empty kitchen, the afternoon sunlight slanting through the windows, and something passed between them that felt almost like understanding. They were 2 strangers bound together by necessity and contract, but maybe that was how many partnerships began. Not with love, but with mutual need and the hope that it might grow into something more. That evening, they had dinner at the Mason Dory again, this time as a married couple. The proprietor made a fuss, offering them champagne on the house, and Clayton noticed how Grace's cheeks flushed with pleasure at being treated like someone special. She had probably had very little of that in her life. "What will you do for work?" Grace asked over dessert. "You mentioned ranching." "I am good with horses and cattle, and there are ranches all around Tombstone that could probably use an experienced hand. I will start asking around tomorrow." Clayton pushed his empty plate away. "What about you? Will you keep sewing?" "For now. I have clients who depend on me, and I like the work. Besides, it would look strange if I suddenly stopped just because I got married. Women work, even married women, especially out here." She paused. "Though if we are going to maintain this fiction, you should probably know things about me." "Things a husband would know." "Like what?" "Like I am 22 years old, born in Pennsylvania, moved to San Francisco with my parents when I was 10, then came here with my father after my mother died 3 years ago. I like reading and can do so in French as well as English. I am terrible at mathematics. I cannot carry a tune, and I have a scar on my left shoulder from falling out of a tree when I was 7. Clayton smiled. "I am 28, born in Texas on a ranch that has been in my family for 2 generations. I can ride anything with 4 legs." shoot better than most, and I have a scar on my right calf from a bull that took exception to my presence when I was 15. I cannot dance worth a damn. I like my coffee black and my whiskey neat. And I have not been to church in 5 years, though my mother would have a fit if she knew. Why did you leave Texas? Grace asked. You said something about a disagreement with your brother, the question he had been dreading. Clayton took a breath. My brother James and I were business partners in the family ranch. Last year, I discovered he had been gambling away ranch money, significant amounts, enough to jeopardize everything my father built. When I confronted him about it, he claimed I was trying to cheat him out of his inheritance. Things got ugly. We fought physically, and I said things I should not have said. In the end, I took my share of the ranch in cash and left. My brother is still there, presumably still gambling, and my mother is caught in the middle trying to keep peace. That must have been awful. It was necessary. If I had stayed, one of us would have ended up dead, and it probably would have been me doing something I could not take back. Clayton met her eyes. So you see, I am not some noble hero. I am just a man trying to build a new life after burning down the old one. Grace reached across the table and put her hand over his. The gesture surprised him. I think that makes you more relatable, not less. They walked back to their new house in the darkness, and Clayton was acutely aware that this was their first night as a married couple, fake or otherwise. Grace seemed aware of it too, because she went straight to her bedroom when they arrived and bid him a quick good night before closing the door. Clayton heard the soft click of the lock engaging and smiled to himself. She was taking no chances, which was smart. He went to his own room and lay down on the narrow bed, staring at the ceiling and wondering what the hell he had gotten himself into. But when he finally fell asleep, it was without the restlessness that had plagued him since leaving Texas. The next few weeks fell into a rhythm that felt surprisingly natural. Clayton found work at the Copper Queen Ranch, 8 miles outside of town, working 6 days a week breaking horses and mending fences. The pay was decent, $1.50 a day, and the work was hard enough to keep his mind occupied. Grace continued her seamstress work, setting up a small area in the sitting room where she could meet with clients. Clayton would come home in the evenings to find her bent over her sewing, needle flashing in the lamplight, and she would look up and smile when he entered. They learned each other's rhythms. Clayton discovered that Grace sang while she cooked, off-key but enthusiastic. Grace learned that Clayton was silent in the mornings until he had his coffee, and then he became almost chatty. They developed a routine of eating dinner together, and then sitting in the small living room, sometimes talking, sometimes reading, sometimes just existing in companionable silence. It was domesticity, and Clayton found he did not mind it nearly as much as he had expected to. One evening, about 3 weeks after their marriage, Grace brought up the subject of letters. You said your mother would expect to hear from us. I should probably write to her soon before she starts to worry. She probably already is worrying. That is her natural state. Clayton set down the newspaper he had been reading. Her name is Martha Hayes, and she lives at the Double H Ranch outside of Austin. I can give you the address. What should I tell her? The truth, more or less, that we met in Tombstone, married quickly because we knew we had found something special and are settling into our life together. The words felt strange but not entirely false. They had found something, even if it was not love yet. Grace wrote the letter over the next few days, showing Clayton drafts and asking for his input. The final version was warm and cheerful, talking about Tombstone and their little house and how kind Clayton was. Reading it, he found himself almost believing they were the happy couple Grace described. Your mother is going to love this, he said. I hope so. I tried to strike the right tone between affectionate and believable. Grace sealed the envelope. I will post it tomorrow." The response came 3 weeks later, a thick envelope addressed to both of them. Clayton brought it home from the post office with trepidation, which Grace must have sensed because she did not open it immediately. "You want to read it first?" she asked. "No, you can. It is addressed to you as much as me." Grace slid open the envelope and pulled out several pages covered in neat, cramped handwriting. As she read, her expression softened. "Oh, Clayton, your mother sounds wonderful. She is. What does she say?" "She says she is thrilled that you have found happiness, that she was worried about you being alone out there, and that she wants to know everything about me. She also says she always knew you would find a good woman when you finally got around to it, which I think might be a gentle jab at you for taking so long." Clayton felt his throat tighten. His mother had always been his champion, even when his father had been harder on him than necessary. "Is she well?" "She says she is feeling strong and keeping busy with the ranch. She mentions your brother is getting better at managing things, which I suppose is good news, I suppose." Clayton did not want to think about James. Grace kept reading. "She has sent us a wedding present. Or rather, she says one is on its way via freight wagon and should arrive in the next month or so. She will not say what it is, wants it to be a surprise." "That sounds like her." Clayton stood up. "I should write back too, I guess. Let her know I am still alive and not causing too much trouble." Over the next few months, a gentle pattern of correspondence developed. Grace wrote to Martha Hayes every few weeks, sharing details of their life and asking questions about Texas. Martha wrote back faithfully, her letters full of warmth and curiosity. Clayton added notes to Grace's letters and occasionally wrote his own, shorter missives. It was during this time that Clayton began to realize his feelings for Grace were shifting. It was small things at first. The way she laughed at his jokes, her head thrown back unselfconsciously. The focused expression she got when working on a particularly delicate piece of sewing. The fact that she always remembered to make extra coffee because she knew he would want a second cup. She was beautiful, but he had known that from the start. What surprised him was discovering she was also funny and thoughtful, and possessed of a quiet strength that he found himself admiring more each day. He did not say anything, of course. Their arrangement was clear, and he had promised not to complicate it with expectations beyond what they had agreed upon. But he caught himself watching her sometimes, wondering what it would be like if their marriage was real in all ways, not just on paper. If Grace noticed his attention, she did not comment on it. She seemed content with their arrangement, friendly but maintaining a certain distance that reminded him this was temporary for her. A means to an end, not an end in itself. Summer deepened, and Tombstone baked under a relentless sun. Clayton came home dusty and exhausted most days, and Grace would have water drawn for him to wash up. They would eat dinner together, often something simple like beans and cornbread, and talk about their days. "Mrs. Henderson wants me to make her daughter's wedding dress," Grace said one evening. "It is a big commission, probably 3 weeks of work, and she is willing to pay well for it." "That is wonderful. You should accept." "I already did. But it means I will be busy for a while, probably working late most evenings." She looked at him almost apologetically. "I might not have time to cook dinner every night. I can manage. I am not entirely helpless in the kitchen." He paused. "Though I might poison us both if I get creative." She laughed. "I will make sure to prepare some things in advance that you can heat up. We will survive." The wedding dress project kept Grace occupied for the next month. Clayton would come home to find her surrounded by yards of white silk and lace, her fingers working with impressive speed and precision. He took over more of the cooking, discovering he was actually not terrible at it when he tried. One night he came home to find Grace crying at her sewing table, the wedding dress in her lap. "Grace, He was at her side immediately. "What is wrong? Are you hurt?" "No, no, I am fine. It is stupid." She wiped at her eyes. This dress is so beautiful. And I am making it for someone else's wedding, and I cannot help but think about how my own wedding was nothing like this. 5 minutes in a judge's office, no dress, no flowers, nothing. Clayton felt his heart contract. "I am sorry. I should have thought about that, should have made it more special for you. You did what needed to be done. We both did. It is just." She gestured helplessly at the dress. "Every girl dreams about her wedding day, and mine was a business transaction." He crouched down next to her chair so they were at eye level. "Grace, I know this is not what you imagined for your life. I know this whole situation is strange and complicated, but I want you to know that even though our wedding was not traditional, I take the commitment seriously. You are not just some business arrangement to me. You are my partner, my friend, and someone I have come to care about a great deal." She looked at him, her eyes still shiny with tears. "You mean that?" Every word. Something shifted in her expression. "Clayton, I thank you for saying that. For being so kind to me. I care about you too, more than I expected to." They stayed like that for a moment, the unspoken implications hanging in the air between them. Then Grace straightened up, brushing away her tears. "I should finish this scene before the light gets too bad." Clayton stood up, the moment passing. But something had changed between them, some barrier had cracked if not quite fallen, and he thought maybe, just maybe, they were moving toward something real. The next day, on his way home from work, Clayton stopped at the general store. He had been paid that morning and had a little extra money. On impulse, he bought a bouquet of wildflowers that someone had brought in from the desert, bright yellow and purple blooms that looked cheerful despite their simplicity. When he got home, Grace was at her sewing station as usual. He presented the flowers with a slight awkwardness that made him feel like a schoolboy. "These are for you," he said, "because every woman deserves flowers sometimes." Grace stared at the bouquet, then at him, then back at the flowers. When she looked up again, her eyes were bright. "That is the sweetest thing anyone has ever done for me. It is just flowers." "No, it is not just flowers." She took them carefully, cradling them like they were precious. "Thank you, Clayton." She found a jar to put them in, setting them on the kitchen table where they both could see them. For the next week, until the blooms faded, Clayton caught her looking at them and smiling. Something was definitely changing between them. It came to a head on a Saturday evening in late August. The wedding dress was finished and delivered, and Grace had been paid handsomely for her work. To celebrate, they decided to splurge on dinner at the Can restaurant, one of the nicer establishments in town. Grace wore her best dress, a deep green that brought out the color of her eyes, and Clayton put on his good suit. Walking through town together, with Grace's hand tucked into his arm, they looked like any other married couple enjoying an evening out. Over steak and wine, they talked and laughed, the conversation flowing easily. Clayton told stories about the horses he had been working with, and Grace described the absurd demands some of her clients made. They were comfortable with each other in a way that had developed gradually over the past months, and Clayton realized with a start that he was happy. Genuinely happy in a way he had not been in years. "What are you thinking about?" Grace asked, noticing his expression. "I am thinking that this arrangement of ours has turned out better than I ever imagined. For me too." She twirled her wine glass by the stem. "Clayton, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "If we are being honest with each other, and I think we are, I need to know something. What happens when our year is up? In a few months we will reach the anniversary of our marriage. Do you still want to end this arrangement?" Clayton set down his fork, his heart suddenly pounding. This was the question he had been avoiding thinking about because the answer had become increasingly clear and increasingly complicated. "Do you want to end it?" I asked first. "Fair enough." He took a breath. "No, I do not want to end it. If I am being completely honest, the thought of you leaving, of going back to living alone, is not something I want to contemplate. But that was our agreement, and I will honor it if that is what you want." Grace was quiet for a long moment, her eyes searching his face. "What if I told you I did not want to end it either? What if I told you that somewhere along the way, this stopped feeling like an arrangement and started feeling like a real marriage, at least on my side?" Hope flared in Clayton's chest. "I would say that I feel the same way, exactly the same way." "So what do we do about it?" "I suppose that depends on what you want." He reached across the table and took her hand. "Grace, these past months with you have been the best of my life. I look forward to coming home every day because I know you will be there. I like hearing about your day, and I like the way you laugh, and I like the fact that you sing off-key while cooking and do not care who hears you. I care about you deeply, and if you are willing, I would like to try to make this marriage real. Not just on paper, but in every way." Her fingers tightened around his. "I would like that too. I think I have been falling in love with you for weeks now, maybe longer, but I was afraid to say anything because I did not want to pressure you or make things awkward between us." "You love me." The words felt impossible, wonderful. "I think I do. Is that crazy? We got married for practical reasons and we barely knew each other. If it is crazy, then we are both crazy because I love you too." Saying it out loud felt like jumping off a cliff, terrifying and exhilarating at once. Grace's face broke into a smile that made her radiant. "So what now? Now we finish our dinner and then we go home and we start building a real life together. Not a temporary arrangement, but an actual marriage." He lifted her hand and kissed her knuckles. "If that is what you want." "It is exactly what I want." They walked home through the warm night, holding hands like sweethearts, and when they reached their little house on Safford Street, Grace turned to Clayton at the door. "I know we have been living together for months, but this feels different now. Like we are starting over. In some ways we are." Clayton cupped her face gently. "Grace, may I kiss you?" In answer, she lifted her face to his. The kiss was soft at first, tentative, as though they were both afraid of pushing too hard too fast. But then Grace's arms came up around his neck, and Clayton pulled her closer, and the kiss deepened into something that spoke of months of restrained wanting finally allowed to surface. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Grace rested her forehead against his. "That was worth waiting for. We can wait longer if you need to. I do not want to rush you into anything. I think we have done enough waiting." She took his hand and led him inside. That night their marriage became real in every sense. Clayton was gentle and patient, and Grace was brave and trusting. And together, they discovered that the connection they had built over months of partnership translated beautifully into intimacy. Afterward, lying in bed with Grace curled against his side, Clayton felt a contentment he had never known before. This woman who had been a stranger just months ago had become the center of his world, and he could not imagine his life without her now. "Are you awake?" Grace whispered. "Yes." "I am glad we did this, all of it. The fake marriage, the arrangement, everything, because it brought us here." "Me too." He kissed the top of her head. "Best decision I ever made, stopping Frank Delaney from dragging you away. My hero." Her voice was teasing but affectionate. They fell asleep like that, wrapped around each other. And when Clayton woke in the morning with Grace still in his arms, he knew he was exactly where he was supposed to be. The next few months were a revelation. With the barriers between them finally down, Clayton and Grace settled into married life with an ease that felt natural. They still worked, still maintained their separate interests, but now they came together at the end of each day not as roommates, but as a couple genuinely in love. Grace moved her things into Clayton's bedroom, and they turned her old room into a proper sewing studio. Clayton built her a better work table and shelves for her supplies, and Grace made curtains for all the windows and generally made the house feel like a real home. They went on picnics on Sundays, riding out into the desert on horses Clayton borrowed from the ranch. Grace learned to ride properly, and Clayton discovered she had a talent for it once she got over her initial nervousness. They would find a spot with some shade and spend the afternoon talking, kissing, planning their future. "I want children someday," Grace said one afternoon, lying with her head on Clayton's lap while he leaned against a rock. "Not right away, but eventually. Maybe 2 or 3. I would like that." Clayton ran his fingers through her hair. "Though I hope they get your brains and not mine. You are plenty smart. You just like to pretend you are not. Fine, then I hope they get your patience, because I definitely do not have any." She laughed and pulled him down for a kiss. In October, a freight wagon arrived with the mysterious package from Martha Hayes. It turned out to be a beautiful handmade quilt, intricate pieced patterns in shades of blue and white, along with a letter explaining that it had been Martha's own wedding quilt, and she wanted Grace and Clayton to have it. Grace cried when she read the letter, touched by the gesture from a woman she had never met. "Your mother is incredibly generous. She would love you if she met you." Clayton studied the quilt, recognizing his grandmother's handiwork in the tiny, precise stitches. "We should invite her to visit sometime. I think enough time has passed that I could face going back to Texas, and I would like you to meet her." "I would like that too." They wrote to Martha that week, extending the invitation and genuinely hoping she would accept. Her response came a month later, saying she would love to visit in the spring when the weather was better for traveling. She also mentioned, almost as an afterthought, that James had gotten married himself and seemed to be settling down, which meant Martha felt more comfortable leaving the ranch for a few weeks. "Are you all right with that?" Grace asked, watching Clayton's face as he read about his brother. "Knowing he is married too, I think so. Enough time has passed that I mostly just hope he is happy and managing better than he was." Clayton folded the letter. "I spent so long being angry at him, but it just wore me out. Now I mostly feel nothing, which is probably healthier." "You are a better man than he probably deserves. I am a man who got very lucky when he met you. That is what I am." Winter came to Tombstone, bringing cooler temperatures and occasional rain. Business at the ranch slowed slightly, and Clayton found himself with more time at home. He used it to make improvements to the house, fixing things that needed repair and building a small chicken coop so they could have fresh eggs. Grace's seamstress business continued to grow. Word had spread about the beautiful wedding dress she had made, and she found herself with more commissions than she could easily handle. She hired another woman, a widow named Sarah Chen, to help with the simpler work, and the two of them turned the sewing room into a productive little operation. "I am making enough money that you could quit the ranch if you wanted," Grace told Clayton one evening. "Not that I want you to, but I want you to know you have options. I like working at the ranch. It keeps me active and gives me something to do besides hover around watching you sew." He pulled her onto his lap. "But I appreciate you offering. It is nice to know we are building security together. We make a good team, the best." As winter turned toward spring, they began preparing for Martha's visit. Grace cleaned the house from top to bottom, and Clayton made sure the spare bedroom was comfortable and welcoming. They were both nervous and excited, though for different reasons. "What if she does not like me?" Grace fretted the day before Martha was scheduled to arrive. "She is going to love you. How could she not? You are brilliant and beautiful, and you make me happy. That is all my mother has ever wanted for me." Martha Hayes arrived on a warm April afternoon, stepping down from the stagecoach in a cloud of dust and immediately pulling Clayton into a fierce hug. She was a small woman, barely coming up to his shoulder, with gray hair and sharp blue eyes that missed nothing. "Let me look at you," she said, holding him at arm's length. "You look good, son, healthy, happy." "I am both, Ma, thanks to Grace." He turned to where Grace stood nervously by his side. "Ma, this is my wife, Grace. Grace, this is my mother, Martha Hayes." Martha turned her assessing gaze on Grace, and for a moment Grace looked like she might bolt. Then Martha smiled, a warm, genuine smile that transformed her face. "Oh, you are lovely. Even prettier than your photograph suggested. Come here and give me a hug, daughter. We are family now." Grace went into Martha's arms, and Clayton saw some of the tension drain out of her shoulders. His mother had a gift for making people feel welcomed, and it seemed she was extending that gift to Grace without reservation. Over the next 2 weeks, Martha settled into their home and their lives with surprising ease. She was delighted by the house, praised Grace's sewing work, and spent hours talking with both of them about everything and nothing. Clayton watched his wife and his mother become friends, and it warmed something in him he had not known was cold. One evening, while Grace was at a client meeting, Martha cornered Clayton in the kitchen. "Tell me the truth," she said. "This marriage, it started as something practical, did it not?" Clayton froze, wondering how she had figured it out. "What makes you say that?" "Because I am not blind, and because your letters in the beginning, while pleasant, did not have the tone of a man in love. That came later." Martha's eyes were kind but knowing. "I am not judging, Clayton. I just want to understand." He sighed and told her the story, all of it, from stopping Frank Delaney to the arrangement he and Grace had made to how it had evolved into genuine love. Martha listened without interrupting, her expression thoughtful. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she patted his hand. "That is one of the most romantic things I have ever heard." "Romantic? Ma, we got married for practical reasons. You got married for practical reasons. But you fell in love the old-fashioned way, by living life together and discovering you were better together than apart. That is more romantic than any whirlwind courtship." She smiled. "And you did the right thing, helping that girl when she needed it. Your father would have been proud of you." "I wish he could have met Grace. He would have loved her. She is exactly the kind of strong, capable woman he always said you needed." Martha squeezed his hand. "You have built a good life here, Clayton. A real life. Do not let anything make you doubt that." When Grace came home, she found Clayton and Martha laughing together in the kitchen over old family stories, and she joined them seamlessly. That night, the three of them sat up late talking, and Clayton felt something he had not realized he was missing click into place. He had a family again, not just by blood but by choice, and it felt right. Martha's visit flew by, and too soon it was time for her to return to Texas. They took her to the stagecoach depot, and she hugged them both fiercely. "You come visit me soon," she told Grace. "I want to show you where this stubborn son of mine came from." "We will," Grace promised. "Maybe in the fall when the weather cools down." Martha turned to Clayton. "Take care of her, take care of each other, and write to me more often. I want to hear about everything." "I will, Ma, I promise." They watched the stagecoach pull away, and Grace leaned into Clayton's side. "I like your mother. She likes you too, I could tell. You think we will really go visit her in the fall? I think we should. It is time I made peace with Texas, and I want you to see where I came from." He kissed her temple. "Besides, she is right. We should stay connected to family." As they walked home through Tombstone's dusty streets, hand in hand, Clayton reflected on how much his life had changed in less than a year. He had come to Arizona running from his past, intending to disappear into the anonymity of the frontier. Instead, he had found Grace, and in finding her he had found a future he had not known he wanted, That night, lying in bed with Grace in his arms, he said, "Thank you." For what? For saying yes when I made that insane proposal, for taking a chance on a stranger, for becoming my partner and my wife and the person I love most in the world. Grace shifted so she could see his face. Thank you for stopping Frank Delaney from dragging me away, for asking me what I wanted, for giving me the freedom to choose and then being patient while I figured out that what I wanted was you. They made love slowly, tenderly, and afterward, Grace fell asleep with her head on Clayton's chest. He lay awake a while longer, listening to her breathing and feeling grateful for a twist of fate that had put him in the right place at the right time to help a woman in distress. Sometimes, he thought, the best things in life came from unexpected places. Summer returned to Tombstone, the heat settling over the town like a blanket. Clayton and Grace fell back into their routines, but everything felt richer now, more solid. Their marriage had weathered its first test, the visit from family, and come out stronger for it. In July, Grace came to him with news that made his heart soar. "I am pregnant. The doctor confirmed it this morning." Clayton swept her up and spun her around, laughing with joy. "That is wonderful. That is the best news I have ever heard. Careful, you are going to make me dizzy." But she was laughing too, her face radiant with happiness. They spent the evening making plans, talking about names and nurseries and what kind of parents they wanted to be. Grace worried she would not know what to do, and Clayton assured her they would figure it out together, the same way they figured out everything else. The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the summer and into fall. Grace continued sewing as long as she comfortably could, and Clayton fussed over her like a mother hen, which she tolerated with patient amusement. In September, they made the trip to Texas to visit Martha, wanting to share the news in person. Martha cried with joy when they told her she was going to be a grandmother, and she immediately began making plans for knitting baby clothes and passing down family heirlooms. The visit to the Double H Ranch was bittersweet for Clayton. Everything looked the same but felt different. He ran into James briefly, and the meeting was awkward but civil. His brother congratulated him on his marriage and impending fatherhood, and Clayton returned the sentiment. They would never be close again, but at least they could be polite, and that was enough. Seeing the ranch, the land where he had grown up, Clayton realized he did not miss it. Texas was his past, but Arizona was his future. Grace was his future, and that was how it should be. They returned to Tombstone in late October, settling back into their routines. Grace was showing now, her belly swelling with life, and Clayton found himself overwhelmed sometimes with love for her and for the child they had created together. Winter brought the baby. On a cold February morning, Grace went into labor. The midwife, a capable woman named Mrs. Johnson, arrived and shooed Clayton out of the room, telling him to make himself useful by boiling water and staying out of the way. The labor lasted 14 hours, and Clayton paced the floor the entire time, terrified and excited in equal measure. Finally, as the sun was setting, he heard the thin wail of a newborn, and Mrs. Johnson appeared at the door with a smile on her face. "You have a son, Mr. Hayes. A big, healthy boy." Clayton entered the bedroom to find Grace propped up on pillows, exhausted but smiling, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in blankets. She looked up as he approached. "Come meet your son." Clayton knelt beside the bed and looked down at the tiny red face of his child. The baby was perfect, with a shock of dark hair and fingers that closed reflexively around Clayton's when he offered one. "He is beautiful," Clayton whispered. "You are both beautiful." "We are thinking about names," Grace said. "I was thinking maybe Charles after my father." "We could call him Charlie. Charles Hayes, I like it." Clayton kissed Grace's forehead. "You did amazing. I am so proud of you. We did amazing. "This is our son, Clayton, our family." Little Charlie Hayes proved to be a relatively easy baby, at least by the standards new parents used. He slept in stretches long enough that Grace and Clayton did not completely lose their minds, and he had a sunny disposition that made up for the inevitable crying and fussing. Clayton discovered he liked being a father. He liked holding his son, liked watching Grace nurse him, liked the way Charlie would stare up at him with unfocused eyes as though trying to figure out this large person holding him. They wrote to Martha with the news, and she sent back a flood of letters and packages, clearly delighted to be a grandmother. She made plans to visit again in the spring to meet her grandson. Life settled into a new rhythm, one that revolved around Charlie's needs and schedules. Grace stopped taking sewing clients for a while, focusing on motherhood, though she continued to make baby clothes and blankets for their growing son. One evening, when Charlie was about 3 months old, Clayton came home from work to find Grace sitting in the rocking chair with the baby, singing a lullaby. The evening light streamed through the window, turning her hair to gold, and Clayton stopped in the doorway, struck by the perfection of the scene. This was what happiness looked like. Not grand gestures or dramatic declarations, but quiet moments of contentment in a small house in Tombstone, Arizona, with the woman he loved and the child they had made together. Grace looked up and smiled at him. "Good day at work. Better now that I am home." He crossed to her and kissed them both, his wife and his son. "How was Charlie today?" "Perfect, as always. Though I think he is getting hungry again. This child eats constantly. He is growing. Look how much bigger he is already than when he was born." They talked about ordinary things, the business of daily life, but to Clayton, it all felt extraordinary. Every moment with Grace and Charlie felt like a gift, something he had not known he was missing until he found it. The months rolled on. Charlie grew, reaching milestones that filled Clayton and Grace with pride. His first smile, his first laugh, the day he rolled over on his own. Each development felt momentous, worth celebrating. Martha visited in May, as promised, and spent 3 weeks doting on her grandson and helping Grace around the house. She taught Grace some family recipes and told stories about Clayton as a boy that embarrassed him but delighted his wife. "He was always the brave one," Martha told Grace one afternoon while Clayton was at work. His brother James was cautious, always thinking before acting, but Clayton would jump in to help anyone who needed it, consequences be damned. "That is how I knew he would turn out all right, no matter what happened with the family business. A man with that kind of heart finds his way eventually." Grace held Charlie close, thinking about how Clayton had jumped in to help her without hesitation, without knowing her, simply because it was the right thing to do. "He certainly found his way to me, and you to him. That is how these things work. The universe has a way of putting people where they need to be." When Martha left, it was with promises to return again soon and invitations for Clayton, Grace, and Charlie to visit Texas whenever they could manage it. Clayton found himself thinking more about the future, about what kind of life he wanted to build for his family. Working at the Copper Queen Ranch was fine for now, but he wanted something more, something of his own. In August, an opportunity presented itself. A small ranch about 15 miles outside of Tombstone came up for sale. The owner had died, and his widow was moving back east to be with family. The property was not large, maybe 100 acres, but it had good water and decent grazing land. Clayton took Grace out to see it on a Sunday, bringing Charlie along in a basket. They walked the property and Clayton pointed out what could be done with it. "We could raise horses," he said. "Maybe some cattle, build it up slowly, make it into something we could pass down to Charlie someday." Grace looked around, shading her eyes against the sun. "It would be a lot of work. It would, but it would be ours. No more working for someone else. No more living in town where you have to be careful about who you talk to and how you act. Just us and the land and the life we build on it. How much is the widow asking? $1,200. I have about half that saved. If you added in what you have been saving from your sewing work, we could probably manage it with a small loan from the bank. Grace walked over to a large cottonwood tree that provided the only shade for yards around. She stood under it, holding Charlie, looking out at the open land. Tell me what you see when you look at this place. Clayton came to stand beside her. I see a house, bigger than what we have now, with a porch where we can sit in the evenings and watch the sunset. I see a barn for horses and a chicken coop and maybe a vegetable garden. I see Charlie running around, learning to ride, helping with chores. I see us old and gray, still working this land, still building something together. I see that too. Grace turned to him, her eyes shining. Let's do it. Let's buy this place and build our life here. The negotiations took several weeks, but by October they owned the ranch. They moved out of their little house on Safford Street, bringing everything they owned on 2 wagons, and began the work of building their homestead. The first year was hard. They lived in a small cabin on the property while Clayton built a proper house, working before and after his regular ranch duties. Grace managed the household and took care of Charlie while also tending a garden and chickens. They fell into bed exhausted every night and got up before dawn to do it all over again. But it was their land, their dream, and that made every hardship worthwhile. By Charlie's 2nd birthday, the house was finished. It was not fancy, but it was solid and comfortable, with 3 bedrooms and a large kitchen that Grace loved. Clayton began building up a small herd of horses, starting with breaking wild mustangs and training them to sell. Grace started taking sewing clients again, though more selectively now. She focused on special commissions, wedding dresses and christening gowns, things that paid well for the time invested. Money was tight, but they were making it work. And more importantly, they were happy. Exhausted, sometimes frustrated, often covered in dust or mud or both, but happy. On their 3rd anniversary, Clayton took Grace outside after Charlie was asleep and they sat on the porch he had built, looking up at the stars. You ever regret it? He asked. Saying yes to my crazy proposal? Never. Not once. Grace leaned against his shoulder. Do you regret asking? Best decision I ever made. He put his arm around her. I love you, Grace Hayes, more every day. I love you too. She was quiet for a moment, then said, Clayton, I have something to tell you. What is it? I am pregnant again. Due next spring. Joy flooded through him. Really? That is wonderful. You are not worried. Things are so tight right now and another mouth to feed. We will manage. We always do. He pulled her close. Besides, Charlie needs a brother or sister to torment. And I happen to think you make beautiful babies, so I am in favor of as many as you want to have. She laughed and kissed him, and they sat on their porch under the Arizona stars, planning for the future and counting their blessings. Their daughter, Mary, was born in April on a warm spring morning. She had Grace's eyes and Clayton's dark hair, and her brother Charlie was immediately protective of her, bringing her his toys and trying to help in the clumsy way of a 2-year-old. Martha came to visit, of course, bringing more gifts and wisdom and love. She stayed for a month this time, helping Grace manage 2 young children while Clayton worked on expanding the horse operation. The ranch began to thrive. Clayton's reputation as a horse trainer spread, and he found himself with more business than he could easily handle. He hired a young man named Tom to help with the daily work, and together they built up a solid operation. Grace's sewing business remained steady, and she found she enjoyed working from home, being able to stop and tend to the children when needed while still earning money for the family. The years rolled on, full of work and love and the ordinary miracles of family life. Charlie grew into a bright, energetic boy who loved following his father around the ranch. Mary was quieter, more thoughtful, with a talent for drawing that they encouraged. A third child, another boy they named James after Clayton's brother in a gesture of reconciliation, arrived 3 years after Mary. Clayton never fully mended his relationship with his brother in Texas, but they exchanged letters occasionally, polite updates on their respective lives. When Martha passed away peacefully in her sleep at the age of 78, Clayton and James stood side by side at her funeral and remembered the woman who had loved them both through everything. The years were not without challenges. There were droughts that killed their garden and made water scarce. There were years when horse prices were low and money was tighter than usual. Charlie broke his arm falling out of a tree, and Mary had a bout with scarlet fever that terrified them both until she pulled through. James, their youngest, proved to be a handful, wild and reckless in ways that reminded Clayton uncomfortably of his own youth. But through it all, Clayton and Grace had each other. They weathered every storm together, their partnership as solid as the day they had agreed to their arrangement in the Nellie Cashman restaurant, but deeper now, rooted in years of shared experience and genuine love. On their 10th anniversary, Clayton surprised Grace with a party. He invited neighbors and friends, people they had gotten to know over the years of running the ranch, and they celebrated under a clear summer sky. "I cannot believe it has been 10 years, Grace said, standing beside Clayton and watching their children play with the other kids. "It feels like just yesterday we were strangers getting married in a judge's office. Best investment I ever made." He pulled her close, not caring who saw. "You have given me everything, Grace. A home, children, a life worth living. I do not know what I did to deserve you, but I am grateful for it every single day." "You stopped a man from dragging me away," Grace said softly. "And then you asked me what I wanted. No one had ever done that before. No one had ever made my wants and needs matter. You gave me the freedom to choose my own path, and I chose you. I will always choose you." They kissed, applauded by their friends, and Clayton marveled at how a single moment of intervention had led to this life, this family, this profound and lasting love. The years continued. Charlie grew into a young man and took over more of the ranch operations, showing a natural talent for working with horses that made Clayton burst with pride. Mary discovered a passion for teaching and eventually moved to Tucson to attend normal school, preparing for a career as an educator. Young James proved to be the charmer of the family, able to talk his way out of trouble as easily as he got into it. Clayton and Grace grew older together, their hair graying, their faces weathering, but their love only deepening with time. They had built something real and lasting, not just a ranch but a legacy of family and commitment, and the kind of partnership that sustained through good times and bad. On a warm evening in late summer, when Clayton was 56 and Grace was 50, they sat on their porch as they had countless times before. Charlie was married now, with a child of his own on the way. Mary was teaching at a school in Tucson and courting a young lawyer. James was working on a ranch in New Mexico, finding his own path. "We did good, did we not?" Clayton said, holding Grace's hand. "With the children, with the ranch, with everything, we did very good." Grace leaned her head on his shoulder. "Though I think the credit goes mostly to you. You were the one who saw a woman in distress and decided to help, consequences be damned. And you were the one brave enough to trust a stranger with your future." He kissed the top of her head. "We built this life together, Grace. Every bit of it, from that first strange proposal to this moment right here. And I would not change a single thing." Not even the part where I could not cook for the first year we were married and nearly poisoned you multiple times. Not even that. It built character." She laughed, the sound as dear to him now as it had been that first night when he bought her flowers. "I love you, Clayton Hayes. I love you too, Grace Hayes, always and forever." They sat in companionable silence as the sun set over their land, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple and red. Two people who had started as strangers brought together by necessity and grown into partners bound by choice and love. It was a good life, a full life, one built on respect and trust, and the simple question Clayton had asked all those years ago in a dusty street in Tombstone. "What do you want?" Grace had wanted safety and freedom and a life of her own choosing. Clayton had given her those things, and in return, she had given him a home and a family and a love that sustained him through everything. As the stars began to emerge in the darkening sky, they went inside together, hand in hand, ready to face whatever the future brought. Because they would face it together, as they had faced everything, and that made all the difference. Their story, which had begun with a scream and an act of courage, ended not with dramatic fanfare but with quiet contentment. Two lives intertwined, two hearts beating as one, a love that had grown from the most unlikely of beginnings into something that would last all their days. And in the end, that was the greatest adventure of all.